There's a danger in always letting other people form your opinions for you. There are certainly times when you need to trust those more informed than you, but if you're only consuming what other people say without critically analyzing for yourself, eventually you can become diluted to the point where you aren't even defending your own opinions. I think this is more true in the realm of art than anywhere else. While in science and math things are firm and rigid for the most part, understandings of things, may evolve and change over time, art exists with very little actually defined. Sure, there are principles and elements you can analyze, but the way that you experience it and the way that it affects you can come from something completely disconnected from anything analytical or technical. There was a period of my life where I was in a dangerous sort of space, where I mostly consumed other people's opinions of art more than I was consuming art itself. It's a weird byproduct of the evolution of the internet, and the way that there are more and more people who create analysis that is, in itself, also entertainment. But I think sometimes we can get so consumed in this secondhand form of experience that we're holding opinions, sometimes even very strong opinions, on something that we haven't even experienced ourselves. Upon reflection, this was my first encounter with Dear Esther. I hadn't played the game, but I had heard a lot of people talk about it. Dear Esther was originally a Half-Life 2 mod that was later remade into its own standalone game. It wasn't on my radar until this independent release, and I remember a lot of video game review personalities that I watched at the time talking about it. And a lot of the rhetoric that I heard surrounding the game was incredibly negative. Walking simulator was a dirty thing to call the game at the time, and I remember having very negative feelings for the game. In fact, I remember a lot of people using walking simulator as a way of trying to exclude Dear Esther entirely from gaming, saying that it lacked the elements that make a game a game. But opinions change over time, and I wonder if I would have actually felt negative about the game if I had played it at the time. It's been a decade since the game came out, and I honestly don't remember any of the specifics of any of the criticism I had heard at the time, just that it was largely negative, and that negativity revolved around the label walking sim. In fact, it's interesting because since playing it, I've done a small amount of looking back, and I actually found quite a lot of video game reviewers talking very positively about Dear Esther at the time. And the reception to the original mod was also very positive from what I've heard. So I finally played it myself, formed my own opinion. If you have any interest in playing the game, I'm going to recommend you don't watch any more of my video, because I think it's best experienced mostly blind. I recommend playing it all the way through in one sitting, and just know that most likely you'll be able to do that in under 2 hours. But if you're interested in hearing my subjective opinion, keep listening, because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience of Dear Esther quite a lot, and I want to talk about it. First off, I'm so happy that something like this exists, and I'm glad that the genre it resides in has continued to grow and evolve. We live in an interesting time of new art. There are art forms that have been around for ages. Painting and music have evolved and changed and been appreciated for thousands upon thousands of years. But even something like video, the moving image, which seems so commonplace now, is incredibly young. Photography just a bit older. And then we have video games. Video games haven't even been around for a century yet, which in the scale of human time is essentially nothing. There has been so much rapid evolution within the medium, both graphically and artistically. Ultimately, I think you can think of walking simulators as just another natural evolution and new form of storytelling that's evolved out of existing mediums branching out and intersecting. Now, I've read some reviews talking about Dear Esther, and one of the comments that really stuck with me is people saying, why wasn't this a book, or a movie, or a short film? And I think that really misses the mark. Dear Esther as a book would completely miss core elements of the experience. The music and visuals, which both play a huge role in what you're experiencing, in fact, they probably make up most of the experience. The music composed by Jessica Curry is phenomenal. It really brings the island to life and the emotions of the story as well. It draws you in but doesn't tell you how to feel in a way that could be heavy-handed. I think the whole team does a really good job of keeping a certain level of ambiguity within the experience where they aren't really telling you things too directly, but many things are suggested and you're given the ability to interpret it how you will. I think this is especially evident within the tracks present on the game's soundtrack. They can be haunting, sorrowful, lonely, but also at times there's tones of optimism and determination. Beyond just the music, there are other sound design elements that I really appreciate in how they added to the immersion within the environment. It's a simple expected thing within gaming now, but when you strip away mechanics like combat or platforming or puzzles, the attention to detail with these elements becomes crucial. The visuals are also simply stunning. Rob Briscoe was the artist who designed the environments present within the game, and again, he really did a fantastic job as well. I think he has a really strong sense of level design as well as composition. Not only are the environments beautiful, but often the way you move through them helps to present that beauty in a way that feels organic and at times serendipitous. There are moments within the game where it feels like you've stumbled upon something natural or beautiful that could have easily been missed, or moments where it feels like you're in just the right place at just the right time, something that I think imitates real life really poetically. I think the real charm here for me is that it manages to do this while not feeling so manufactured, despite the fact that it very obviously is choreographed. Okay, so beautiful soundtrack and stunning visuals. Sure, it would be different if it were just a book, but why not make a short film or something where you can have a soundtrack and show these sights as well? I think a lot of people consider this because Dear Esther has no interactivity through button presses or objects or even really influence on the story or environment beyond how you move. But I think to say there is no interaction at all does discount that movement is a mechanic. If you're given control, it's still control, even if it's very limited. There's more opportunities for subtle symbolism and imagery, more opportunities to be rewarded for careful observation when you are in control with the ability to frame what you're seeing. Consider this. When you're watching a film, shots and framing are intentional. Generally, when it comes to someone making art that is very intentional, things that are in the frame are important. The way that the frame is constructed is intentional. If something is framed oddly, there's often a meaning behind it. If you see repeated imagery, even colors, there can be symbolism or metaphor there. If you're shown a shot staring at the grass, even if it seems really weird and out of place, perhaps there is meaning there, either something that you're missing or meaning in how disjointed it is. In Dear Esther, if your screen is full of grass, it's because you're staring at grass. I'm not saying one of these mediums is better, but a game versus a film is very different when it comes to how things are visually set up. You are not limited to a frame in a first-person game. You are the camera. This leaves more opportunities for you to frame shots, and for you to find this meaning in what you are looking at, which also can lead to more vagueness and intention, and certainly more opportunities to miss potential symbolism or whole parts of the environment. For instance, throughout the game, when you're outside, this radio tower is a fairly constant presence. It looms over the landscape as we slowly draw nearer and nearer to it across our journey. But honestly, you could largely ignore it or not find any significance in it until the end of the game, because at no point are you really forced to look at it. If it was a film, it would be far more apparent that this repeated object holds significance. But again, I don't really think that's a bad thing. It just is. It's a quality of the medium, and there's different ways developers can exercise control over the player to either give them more or less control. Similarly, there's different ways that players can take control. If you wanted to, you could play this entire game backwards, never looking forward, just walking in reverse. That is a power that you have as a player, something that wouldn't be present in different mediums. Included in the Landmark edition of Dear Esther, there's a director's commentary, which I found to be really interesting, as it helps dive more into the thought process from the people who actually made the game. I found the commentary to be very valuable and If you're someone interested in the creation of art or games, or just really liked the game when you first played it, I think it's definitely worth listening to and hearing the thought process of each of the artists. It's very clear that they each thought through what they were doing quite a lot, and I really appreciate getting to hear more of their insight. That being said, I think I wish I had played through the whole experience another time before listening to the commentary, because after hearing their thoughts mixed with my own, there isn't a whole lot more for me to discover through the experience. I can still appreciate and draw some different connections, but the story itself feels largely revealed to me at this point. So up to this point, I've been a little bit vague, trying not to spoil anything, but I do have some more critical points, and with that comes some pretty direct spoilers, including the very end of the game, just so you know. Also, I haven't really discussed the writing and voiceover, which is probably the third large component that completes the trinity of this game along with visuals and music. The writing is very poetic, and at times I really enjoyed it, and the way that it can combine with the environments to really complete and make this solid experience.
When someone had died or was dying, or was so ill they gave up what little hope they could sacrifice, they cut parallel lines into the cliff, exposing the white chalk beneath. You could see them from the mainland or the fishing boats, and know to send aid or impose a cordon of protection, and wait a generation until whatever pestilence stalked the cliff paths died along with its hosts. My lines are just for this, to keep any would-be rescuers at bay. The infection is not simply of the flesh.
But it could also just sometimes be a little bit so-so for me. This is all, of course, subjective, and I think that this kind of poetry and more dreamy, surreal writing style is going to really vary in who it appeals to. Overall, I really quite liked it, but I also think that with the way that it is written, it probably warrants a good number of listens, coming back to it to really hear the words and draw associations between them, which I've only played through the story version twice, so possibly not enough to really fully appreciate it, but it also might just not fully be my thing. I did really appreciate that very early in my first playthrough, there was a line about not feeling alone, which made me feel somewhat unsettled right from the beginning. I do find Dear Esther quite haunting, and my first playthrough, I was decently creeped out at points, mostly by audio cues, but I also do get frightened pretty easily by games. From a technical standpoint, I do feel like the audio fidelity of the voiceovers changed at times. Either the inflection of the voice was different, or even sometimes it felt like the mastering was maybe different. In some recordings, I felt like there was this variance between them. I'd hear one line, then I'd walk a little bit forward and I'd hear another one, and I was more so thinking about the mastering versus actually hearing the character saying these things. A big controversial thing over Dear Esther is how slow you move. Even in reviews praising the game, it's something that some people have brought up. In the director's commentary, they stick with it pretty confidently.
All right, let's talk about walking. Let's do it. We're gonna address the elephant in the room, the very, very slow-moving elephant in the room. Esther is definitely slower than a lot of games, and I think that's actually why it's lasted. I think if we did have moments where we went, should it be faster, should we put a sprint button in, but I'm so pleased that we kind of held our nerve and went, no, just as like in real life, I don't run everywhere because that would be weird. It's okay to have a game where you don't run everywhere. And actually, it is a bit weird to run everywhere.
And I can certainly respect the choice, but also I do really sympathize with people who have an issue with it. There were a few times where I would go to explore the edge of an environment, and then after finding something or potentially nothing, I have to backtrack back to where I'm supposed to be going, and it could feel kind of like a slog. The pacing certainly feels intentional, but maybe after the first completion of the game, a sprint button could be unlocked, because while I do see myself wanting to experience this game again in the future, I do feel like the slower pacing may grow more frustrating now that there isn't as much discovery. Also, I kind of lied earlier, because while you can't interact with things, you do have one more action besides movement. You have robot vision, and you can zoom in. There were a few points where I found myself bored with the slow pacing of the walking, and zooming in and out was my way to quell that. But again, I'm kind of torn on where I land with this aspect of the experience. Some movies and books are just slower paced, and they demand that patience from you. I think it comes down to whether or not that feels justified. Does a slower pace draw you into the piece in a way that you wouldn't be experiencing it in the same way if you could move faster? And in the case of Dear Esther, I'd ultimately say yes, the slower pacing is the right choice. For the most part, I think it really helped to draw me in more, even if I was a little bit frustrated. I think this is an experience that demands a certain amount of patience from you, and part of that is by forcibly limiting you, because I think when it comes to games, if there is a way to move faster, people are going to use that. And if that's going to make this experience seem like more of a sprint than this sort of slow exploration, then ultimately it is the right choice to lock you into that slower speed. In terms of storytelling, I personally did not like the small part of the story where you diverge and you're in this dreamlike underwater highway scene. For me, it was a little too surreal and fantastical. It feels out of place when the rest of the experience is largely very grounded on this island. Sure, it's a little surreal at times, but it's grounded. It's things that exist within our real world and are plausible. But I just feel it also plays their hands too much in terms of revealing the story and what's being suggested and hinted at through dialogue and small mementos planted within the environment. I'm pretty big into subtlety though, and I can see where other people interpret subtlety as nothing happening. Lastly, my other, unfortunately kind of large criticism is with the ending. I like the ending itself, but I do kind of have an issue with its execution. Mainly that control is taken away from you. And they do discuss this on the commentary track.
We had a lot of debates, didn't we, about the ending of the game and whether the player should retain control or whether it was okay to go to a cutscene at this point. I personally don't mind it. I actually actively like it because I think it works really well as a metaphor for loss of control at that point. Dan, I know you're not as keen.
Yeah, I'm not. I would have loved the player not to have had control taken away from them, but to me it was a balance between two evils. The evil of having a cutscene and the evil of the player accidentally falling off the ladder halfway up and destroying the ending.
Yeah, I agree. I think we tried a few different things, and the tech at the time just wasn't, the ladder tech at the time just wasn't there. So, and the other thing for me was pacing. It was making sure all the music, the voiceovers, the timings and everything were perfect for that final jump off point. And just letting the players kind of noodle around going up a ladder for what may have been like 7 minutes because it's a tall tower was kind of an impossible task.
I get it. There can be technical limitations, and obviously I'm not in a position where I can see those other versions. Perhaps if I saw them, I'd also come to the same conclusion. But as a person experiencing this journey, I can't help but feel a little robbed. So much of what makes this experience what it is your agency and being able to move on your own. I wish we got to keep that up until going over the edge. I just feel it would be more impactful to have you as the player commit to that action. Think about that part of the Stanley parable where you go over the edge repeatedly. That moment works so well because it is you, the player, doing it.
No, what are you doing, Stanley? Please, I'm asking you not to take this away from me. I can't go back to what I was before. If you die, we'll both go back. Why are you doing this?
Perhaps if the worry was the pacing, having the ascent to the tower go faster somehow could maybe help with that. Sure, if you give players agency here, maybe some would goof off and lose the timing or the grandness of the ending, but if you give them agency, chances are those people are already going to be kind of goofing off the whole way here, and people who really want to experience it are probably going to be engrossed enough that they just keep going. In a weird sort of way where they have control, but you're still framing it so much that they're doing what you want them to do. It's really the only big moment that I wish was different, and it wouldn't bug me so much, but it is the ending. At least that final moment before you hit the ground really makes up for it though, because I do really like the ultimate ending that you get, just not in love with the last few steps to get there. Does it sour the overall experience for me though? No, not at all. I still really enjoyed Dear Esther, and I'm glad that I finally got to play it. It is a beautiful little experience, and it's very clear that a lot of love and passion went into this project. I think it's impressive how haunting it can feel at times, and it makes sense that this team would later be brought on to make a horror game, the sequel to Amnesia: The Dark Descent, although there certainly is mixed feelings surrounding that game. A game I've started but I've yet to finish. Perhaps now I'll have to revisit it and see what my thoughts are there. Anyways, thanks for watching, and drive safe.